Today in your art studio, we are talking fiber arts. We're going to be learning how to thread a needle. We're going to be learning some sewing basics in our around the room exercise. Have fun. Okay, the two most basic skills and most important. You need to know how to thread a needle and how to pin two pieces of fabric together. So first, let's do thread a needle. A needle has an eye, which is this, I'm trying to make it so we can see. So you can see through the hole. That's the eye of the needle. And a pin is not the same thing. A pin has the sharp point at the end and the pin head, which is for grasping. It almost looks like a nail. So first, to thread a needle, always make sure you know where your needle is. Put it back in the pin cushion until you're ready for it. Get yourself a piece of thread as long as you think you might need. I always recommend that you double over your thread for strength and because it makes it, for beginners, it's easier and you're less likely to lose the end of your thread if you double it over. So then I'm going to take my sewing needle and so carefully I'm going to hold my thread near the end. And I'm going to carefully slide through the eye of the needle and then grab it from the other side. See? That's what you're practicing first, threading your needle. Pinning. Back to our little friend pins here that have the pin head and the point. These are for holding things in place while you get ready to sew. I have 2 layers of fabric here. I'm going to pin them together in preparation for stitching them together later. So to pin, you hold on to the pin head. You go down through both layers, careful not to get your finger. And then I use my finger here at the back to push back up through. You will, as a beginner sewer, you're going to stick your finger every now and then. Don't panic, it's not that big of a problem. If you are bleeding, you get a Band-Aid, no big deal. Then the next pin, assuming I'm going to sew along this edge, I will continue to pin the 2 pieces together. From the back, it looks almost like a staple. From the front, you can see the pin head and the point going down and back up through the fabric. Okay, tying a sewing knot. I would argue that this is the most important thing because if you don't properly knot your thread, your work will unravel, and that is a very sad moment when that happens. So what I have here, I have my threaded needle, and it is doubled over. So yeah, there's 2 strands. Then I have the other end, and what I do is face them toward each other. So my ends of my thread are facing my thumb, and then I'm going to, with my thumb and forefinger, I'm going to pinch them onto the needle. Then I'm going to take the thread, and I've got both of them. I treat them as if they are one. I'm going to go around 1, 2, 3, and if you need a bigger knot, and in this case, just to show you for an example, 4 times around, then I pinch that between my fingers on the sewing needle. I grab the sewing needle carefully, I hold those wraparounds with my pinchers, and I keep them there while I pull the thread through, all the way to the end. And at the end, I pull it nice and snug. And hopefully you can see that well enough. I have a knot. That little knot will keep it from being pulled all the way through. And then this is what I recommend. Snip off your knot and do the same thing again. Practice makes perfect. Practice is learning. So we face our tail toward our fingers, and pinch it right onto the sewing needle. Around and around. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then carefully pinch between our pointer and forefinger and pull the needle through. Pull the thread through all the way to the end. And that's a much better knot too. Our most basic and important stitch is called a running stitch or a straight stitch, depending on who you're talking to. So here I have 2 pieces of fabric that are pinned together. And I want to start about 1/4 inch in from the edge, going down through both layers, careful, pulling the thread all the way till the end, and the knot will keep it from pulling through. Then I'm going back up from the back or the bottom to the top. See how close together that is? That's about 1/4 inch. You don't want your stitches much larger than that, because then when you flip your work right side out, chances are it will have spaces that things will come out of. Like if you're making a pillow, for example, the stuffing will leak out between stitches that are too large. We don't want that. All right, this is a finishing knot. To end your stitch, when you are all the way finished sewing, you want to tie a knot to make sure that your work doesn't unravel. So the best way to do that is to lift one more stitch, pull your thread nearly through, but not through. Create a nice loop. Then you want to take the thread and you go over the loop and back up from underneath. So I'm going across the loop with my thread like this and coming up from underneath there like that. When you pull that tight, you have a very sturdy knot. It's that coming from under that makes that happen. So pay close attention and make sure you're going from underneath, not from the easier way through. So I also recommend that you double that. Again, I'm going through right in the same or similar spot, like right near the knot. Pulling through until there's a loop, and then coming up from underneath that loop. So from underneath with my needle, pulling a nice and firm, sturdy knot. Our second stitch is called a whip stitch. A whip stitch is when, instead of going in a straight line through both pieces of fabric, you're going around and up through both pieces. So I'm going to start from underneath in order to have my knot at the back. I'm coming up through this. And then instead of going back through both like in a straight stitch, I'm going to circle around and come up again through the bottom at about 1/8 to 1/4 inch. And that's the stitch. I will continue to do that. I have an edging stitch with a whip stitch, which looks nice, but I can also use that here along this seam where I'm sewing one piece on top of another, like an applique. Applique is just when you have one piece of fabric that you are sewing down on top of another. So on the side of the yellow, I'm going down through the black only and up through both. Included in our fiber arts studio is yarn, in those, and then over here, the rest of the supplies. Thread, scissors. If they say fabric only, you are only to use them to cut fabric, ribbon, and thread. That's it. No paper. Knitting needles, crochet hooks, embroidery needles, pins, and sewing needles. And here, handouts for embroidery stitching, fabric, scraps, sewing patterns for tracing, fabric, fiber fill called stuffing, weaving items, some more fabric that specifically is felt, and canvas, and some string. Put everything back where you get it from when you're finished, please.